Do you find yourself endlessly analyzing without taking action? Have you ever felt like your insight was ahead of your ability to change? Do you long to live what you know, but something holds you back? If your answer is yes to any of these, you're not alone, and there are ways to change it. There's a deeper reason for this inner resistance: archetypal dynamics that work in the psyche of every one of us. In this video, we'll explore the deeper forces behind that gap between knowing and doing, particularly the shadow of the magician who can possess us, paralyze us, and keep us from truly living what we know. To understand why this resistance grips us so deeply, we need to step back and look at the psychic architecture underneath our behavior. There are four fundamental modes of energy in the human psyche, four distinct streams of libido: feeling and sensing, in search of pleasure; thinking and intuiting, in search of knowledge; doing and facing difficulty, in search of creation; and finally, being and presence, in search of center. Each of these modes corresponds to one of the four fundamental archetypes of the psyche: the lover, the magician, the warrior, and the king or queen. When one of these energies becomes dominant at the expense of the others, we become imbalanced. Many of us, especially those drawn to inner work and symbolic understanding, find ourselves caught in the realm of the magician. We study, we analyze, we gather knowledge and insight, but we often don't move. We know what we need to do, and yet we don't do it. This is not a failure of will. It is the grip of resistance, an archetypal possession by the shadow of the magician. We've gathered insight, we've done the work, but when it's time to act, something resists. This mysterious gap between knowing and doing isn't a sign of laziness or moral failure. It is, in many cases, the mark of a psychic possession by the dark side of our intellectual capacities, or in archetypal language, by the shadow of the magician archetype. In its fullness, the magician represents knowledge, insight, pattern recognition, initiation, ritual, and the transformative function of consciousness. He is the shaman, the alchemist, the mentor, healer, and the keeper of sacred tradition. Psychologically, the magician mediates between the conscious ego and the unconscious, translating symbolic material into usable wisdom. In Jungian language, the archetype of the wise old man and the self in its guiding function are equivalent to the archetype of the magician. He is the bearer of gnosis, the one who knows. His realm is that of symbols, dreams, and of inner and outer technologies. Yet, like all archetypes, the magician has a shadow. The shadow magician arises when the archetypal energy of the magician is split off from the embodied, relational, and vulnerable aspects of the psyche. This often begins in early life as a survival strategy, when a child finds that knowledge, cleverness, or detachment provide safety, while emotional expression brings punishment and pain. In adulthood, some of the expressions of the shadow magician include chronic intellectualization of feelings, emotional detachment masked as wisdom, over-reliance on analysis at the expense of action, cynicism and superiority towards others who are doing and engaging in life. The shadow magician lives in every psyche. He is bipolar, splitting into two opposites, an active and a passive pole. Let's meet those two faces of the shadow magician, and after that, point to several ways to walk with them towards being able to not get stuck in knowing, but stepping into action and manifestation. The innocent appears harmless. He's soft-spoken, self-effacing, overly polite. He claims not to understand his emotions, or why his relationships always seem to go wrong. Beneath the innocent's helpless exterior lies a veiled cunning, a highly developed but covert manipulative instinct. He may claim to be powerless, but his deflections and his endless complaints are not passive, they are strategies. He projects his own hidden rage onto others and believes he carries none of it. He feels that others are out to get him. He believes the world owes him care, but that he shouldn't put the effort to earn this care. Because he is in the passive pole of the magician's shadow, he dreads responsibility. He doesn't act, and so he isn't responsible for the outcome and potential failures. He doesn't want to transition into the adult world of being creative and productive. He sits on the sidelines, criticizing and devaluing the efforts of others. In clinical terms, this pole is embodied by the dependent personality disorder, where the self vanishes and others are made the center of meaning. He fears assertion, because buried under his passivity is a volcano of repressed anger and envy. He manipulates without realizing it. He sugarcoats demands. He cannot take a compliment, and eventually others sense the falsehood in his attitude. His nightmare is abandonment, and yet his very strategies, his politeness, his helplessness and criticism eventually push people away. This is the innocent's trap, to appear harmless while secretly refusing to participate in life. When the repression fails and the innocent can no longer contain his resentment, he shifts into the passive-aggressive disorder. Aggression leaks out, but veiled in intellectual or emotional sabotage. He makes sharp comments that cut others, but hides behind meaning no harm. Often, others see through him long before he does. He believes his center is outside of him, in another person, and cannot steward his own life without another to define him. The other face of the shadow magician is extroverted. He is the trickster, manipulative, charming, elusive. He does not hide his cunning, he weaponizes it. He feels contempt for the innocent and for anyone vulnerable or sincere. He mocks efforts to grow, to love, to build. He is not interested in creation. He is here to undermine, to destroy. Emotionally detached, cold, and often sadistic, he uses language and intellect to deconstruct meaning, to gaslight and dominate. He withholds, exploits, and takes pleasure in destroying what others build. Where the innocent hides his power, the trickster shows it off, with cruelty which he enjoys. He shows up in disorders like the narcissistic personality, grandiose, exploitative, emotionally hollow, the schizoid personality, detached, incapable of intimacy, obsessed with intellect, and the antisocial personality, actively destructive, without a sense of right and wrong. These are people who hate feeling, fear tenderness, and see life as something to win at any cost. They too avoid making a world, but with fire and force, rather than vulnerability or grief. The person caught within the bipolar shadow of the magician must find a way to bring the two opposite poles into conscious relationship if they are to move towards psychological maturity. These two poles are mirrors of each other. Though their behaviors seem to oppose, one cruel and cunning, the other helpless and manipulative, they are both avoiding the same core task: embodiment, responsibility, creative risk, and a commitment in favor of life and other. The ego plays a crucial role in this work. It alone can begin to observe the hidden strategies of both poles and create space to contain and hold them. Through slow and often painful effort, the ego can build a bridge between the passive cunning of the innocent and the active cruelty of the trickster. It is a ritual of reintegration, and not an intellectual exercise. Healing begins with symbolic and imaginal work. The ego must engage both poles in conscious dialogue through active imagination. One might visualize the innocent and the trickster seated at the table. Allow them to speak, to argue, to grieve. Let the trickster name his disdain for vulnerability. Let the innocent express his terror of being abandoned. This psychic ritual makes them aware of each other. To support this inner encounter and to help translate insight into action, there are several practical ways to engage the resistance. Insight without embodiment often leads to paralysis. Once you recognize the inner split, shift attention into the body. Ask, what does this knowing feel like when I try to act on it? Where does fear live in the body? Movement, breathwork, somatic tracking, even a single intentional action can re-anchor the psyche in the here and now. Resistance often begins to melt when we bring the body into the process. The magician loves open exploration, but structure is what allows containment. Create small, time-bound containers for action. Tell yourself, for 15 minutes, I will do this task regardless of how I feel. This isn't willpower. It's respectful containment for the psyche to meet reality. Speak your resistance or write it. Give it a voice. When you say, a part of me believes I'll be exposed if I try, you are no longer unconsciously possessed by it. Naming helps with this identifying. The ego feels failure, rejection, ridicule, but the self calls us to commitment, to process, not to results. Create a small ritual that carries symbolic meaning, like lighting a candle, and then say aloud, I commit to taking one step, not because I know it will succeed, but because I honor life. The shadow magician prefers secrecy and isolation, but transformation often requires a witness. Share your intention with a trusted friend, mentor, or guide. Let someone hold space for your movement forward. These are not techniques to bypass the shadow magician, but invitations to bring him into the light, to work with his energy rather than be ruled by it. Each time you move from knowing into doing, no matter how small the step, you honor life. You promote wholeness. As this reconciliation deepens, the ego establishes a stable and conscious connection with the mature magician within. And it is only then, when both poles are seen, named, and no longer acted out blindly, that the archetype's true power becomes available. If we avoid this shadow work, the magician's energy will distort whatever we touch, no matter how noble our intention. The shadow, when ignored, does not disappear. It operates behind the curtain and takes hold of us before we can realize it. It's like a lens that suddenly colors our perspective while we're sure that it's us that see and choose. What follows is a development of generativity, a capacity to guide, to initiate, to see patterns not just for self-protection or cleverness, but in service of healing, creation, and deepened life. This process does not eliminate resistance, but it transforms its nature. Resistance becomes a messenger, not a wall. It shifts from paralysis to wise caution, from sabotage to discernment. Resistance, then, is not simply a block. It is a message from the shadow magician himself. I am afraid to live what I know. And to that, the voice of individuation replies, let's walk this path together, even imperfect, even unsure. So when you find yourself knowing what to do, but doing nothing, ask yourself, which face of the shadow magician is present in me now? What am I protecting myself from by not acting? The task is to bring both poles to light, so we could consciously work on integrating what was hidden, so that our knowing can serve life and we could enter life more fully.